Hi there and welcome to Central Texas Gardener. I'm Tom Spencer. It's been a mighty tough year between hard freeze and the worst summer in recent history, but there are lots of plants that handle both extremes. Today, Justin Kasulka from Big Red Sun shows us a few of them. On tour, visit a new downsized backyard habitat and rose garden that's made it through just fine.
When Betsy Hilton and Joe Denton moved to their new Mueller home in East Austin, they brought their garden with them.
We came here because we've been wanting a new home in Central Austin, and we didn't. We looked at the houses in the suburbs and stuff, and we decided we didn't want to have a commute.
Even though the garden's much smaller than the one they left, Joe's design invites an expansive sensation. And he found a spot for the 120 plants he moved from their old house.
About a year and a half in advance to our move, I started repotting a lot of the stuff that I had planted over the years, and also started propagating plants as well, because there was a number of roses that I wanted to propagate, and that had been planted by the original builder of the home, which was built in 1941, and also plants that friends and neighbors had given to us. I wanted to save those, as a remembrance of them.
They didn't have to give up their love of backyard wildlife either. Even in a small garden, they have all the elements to qualify as a certified backyard habitat. With an old log, Joe anchored a bird bath for garden art with an essential purpose. To give his plants a good start, Joe's first job was to re-engineer the soil.
Of course, being the old airport, these soils laid essentially fallow or under the runways for a number of years, and I think our particular house location was where the rental cars were in the old airport, and so the soils are something to be dealt with, and the good example is that corner bed, because I double dug the soil out, so I went down at least 12 inches in depth just to get the soils out of that corner. Now, part of the soils I used in the corner itself to go back into it, but when I did put the soils back into it, I tried to mix in at least 50% compost and mulch into that because it's such heavy clays. And then I also mixed either crushed granite or sand or gravel, and usually a combination of those to again enhance the drainage, as well as the crushed granite provides a lot of micronutrients.
In the backyard, he moved soil away from the house to create levels.
I cut this area down by about 9 inches up against the house, and coming across with fairly level, but with enough slope to it so that it has enough drainage. So I built the slope into the patio as well. And then we actually ended up hauling off 6 yards of dirt from the yard to get it to a level stage.
Before he got to that project, he'd already staged his rock wall raised bed.
I knew kind of what my elevations are going to be, so I excavated my wall down, and then I put my wall in with a kind of a modified dry stack method. So I was cementing and mortaring in the back half of the stone to try to leave the front half of the stone to be more of as a dry stack. And then the next step was to put in the patio itself, and I hired a couple of guys to help me excavate the soil out, and so we took all the soil away that we needed to, and then I put in 3 inches of road base material and compacted that, and then over that we put 1 inch of sand, and then my son and I we started laying the pavers, and over a period, I guess 1 weekend, we put all the patio in.
For the lower level, he went with flagstones.
Partially just to kind of visually break up the area. None of this is mortared in, so it keeps up with the permeability.
Joe's design, with the bring-along and new plants, makes a big statement in diversity of form, fragrance, color, and texture. All he needed was a fountain, a gift from friends.
We like to entertain, and this is a great place for that, and it gives just a soothing background to just to sit here and relax. When it's cool enough, we'll open up the windows and you can hear the sound of the fountain inside the house.
In a narrow spot outside the fence, they grow food and herbs. Native rain lilies naturalize among the edibles. Since Mueller wants to connect neighbors, but still respect privacy, fences cannot be impervious barriers. Betsy and Joe went with a see-through design framed with roses and vines. Builders were required to install native plants. Homeowners can tend their gardens as they wish, like drought-tough, fragrant old blush framing Betsy and Joe's front porch.
The only restriction that you really have is all the plants that are on the do not plant list for the city of Austin.
In this everyone knows everyone community, neighbors often meet over the low garden fence.
We like the metal fencing that you see like in New Orleans and places that we visited. And so originally we had thought about even having a decorative fence all the way around the yard. But we ultimately decided just to have an accent corner, just to kind of anchor that corner of the lot, and of course it also provides another place to plant roses. I grew up in Fort Worth, and there was a house next to my elementary school there in Fort Worth that I walked by every day, and the fellow's name, he lived alone in the house, he was an elderly man, his name was Mobley, and Mr. Mobley had flowers all over his yard. And I never really thought about it at the time, but over the years I have come to recognize that as kind of an influence on me. And the sharing of the flowers, just people be able to walk by your house and see the flowers and to essentially share those flowers with the people who pass by. And so that's been kind of one of the things that have kind of has come out in, I guess, in my viewpoint. I want to put things in that I can share with other people. And so, to me, that's the greatest compliment when people can walk by and to see your plants and appreciate them just for being there. And that's one of my goals, was just to share.
Oh, that's so cool. I love seeing all those little gardens springing up around the Mueller development. Thanks for sharing your garden with us. Right now we're going to be turning our attention to cold hardy plants that are also drought tolerant, a great combination for us here in Central Texas. Joining us to talk about this is Justin Kasulka from Big Red Sun, and it's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Big Red Sun, we're proud to say, not just a great design firm, but it's reopening its retail presence in East Austin, and that's something to celebrate. That's on East Cesar Chavez, right?
Yeah, 1311 East Cesar Chavez. We're at the corner of Cesar Chavez and Navasota.
All right.
Big white building there, and we got Big Red Sun painted on the side of it, real big. So
yeah, well, and it's going to be a delight to have a retail presence back open for us here in Austin. And of course, we're just talking about this, Justin, but Big Red Sun has become almost an emblematic design firm here in Austin. Has really helped create kind of, I think, an Austin gardening aesthetic. And so I'm thrilled to have you on the program. This is a great topic, right? I mean, this is what everybody wants.
Yeah, with all the water restrictions, this is real important to be cognizant of this when we're thinking about our plant selection. And
Well, everybody wants drought tolerant. and they're moving towards things like agaves and yuccas and a lot of other things, looking to the west basically for plant material. But one thing people really need to be cognizant of is not all of those agaves, not all these other plants are going to be cold hardy.
Exactly. There's some great varieties that do well here, and then there's some other ones that are a little marginal that you might want to stay away from. One of my favorites that I've been using a lot has been the agave Weberi.
Yeah.
I love the color of it. It's this nice blue-gray. It has this smooth, wavy leaf to it, and it comes with this black tip at the top.
Right.
It's just a nice, striking structural plant, but it will survive temperatures down well below freezing, around like 12 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, and then of course the heat isn't a problem for it.
Right. Well, you brought a specimen along with you, and it's a gorgeous one. And this is one of my favorite of the agaves. And this is a plant that gets really impressively large in the landscape too. And this is one of those. I think of this as a big red sun plant because of how sculptural it is, and I think that's something that you use plants often for their sculptural qualities.
I like the shape and structure that it adds into the landscape, and then the color that it brings into the palette. It's a soft color, but it just goes well with a lot of the feeling that we like to convey.
Yeah, well, it's I think a gorgeous specimen, and that's again agave Weberi. And nice to know that it gets down to 12. And another one that you like to use is the Patio, and this is a Texas native. And I think it can take even more cold.
It can get very cold, this one. And I like this one because it's so versatile. We've planted it in masses. There's a great garden we've been working on the client for many years, and we have probably 65 of them all planted near each other, and they've all started to pup, and it's just turning into this great mass with a few different layers of plants behind it. But it makes a really great border. They stay small, so if you have a smaller space, you don't have to worry about it taking over the yard or getting aggressive against a sidewalk. And it's even small if it does great in containers. So if you have a patio or you have just an apartment balcony and you want to have some plant out there that is going to take the heat and take the sun, it'll do well in containers. I've had great luck with it.
Again, it's a agave Patio, and it comes in a couple of different forms. There's a one called truncata that's even more dwarfed.
The very small.
And that, I think, may be my favorite garden plant, period, for Austin.
Yeah, it has a great little shape to the leaf, and the color of it, that nice blue-gray, is really nice, and the black tip on it just kind of pops off of it, and it's just a great plant.
Yeah, well, agave Patio is high on my list. And some other, again, thinking of west, Ocotillo is one plant that, we if you ever go to Big Bend, you see it all the time. You don't think of it as a garden plant, but increasingly used now, right?
It is. It's another plant that adds a lot of structure into a planting scheme or a garden. It gets very tall. It can get well over 10, 15 feet tall, and it has these great spikes on the edges of the stems that come up from it. When it rains, it'll flush with little green leaves all over, and then the bloom time, it has these bright orange flowers on the top of it. It's just really lovely.
Yeah, when it rains.
When it rains. It will, once in a while, but this will last until it does rain, which is great.
Right. Well, these are all terrific specimens. There are lots of things that grow close in as well to Austin that we should be looking at. I think of the yuccas, for example. Again, providing some of the same sculptural qualities that we expect from like the agaves. Often though, and with trunks on them, and one of them is the Thompson's yucca, which I know that you enjoy using as well.
That one's great. It's real slow growing, but it's very rewarding when you get one of those that trunks up and that's towering up as tall as you are, and it has this great sculptural head over the top of the leaves that come out. Great blue-gray color, and then the trunk, you can either trim the dead leaves off or you can just leave it natural and let those dead leaves hang down as it grows up. It's really nice, and it can add some height into your garden.
Right. And all the plants that we've talked about thus far can be counterpointed with green plants too, and we'll be talking about a few of those that you like to use. But there's one other form of agave, yucca, that I want to make sure that we talk about, because in many ways, I think this is an emblematic plant for like western Travis County, and that's the twist leaf yucca. I mean, you see it everywhere on the edges of the escarpment here, and I love this plant, and I especially love it. There's a form that's been crossed with pallida, Yucca pallida, and it's got the blue-green coloration in a yucca, but with the twisted leaf.
With the twisted leaf, and it has that little bit of color on the edge of it, and they're just really great. They don't get too big. The leaves aren't too sharp. A lot of people worry about whether they're going to poke their arm or anything with it, but
relatively soft leaf.
Relatively soft, but still remains a little bit of structure to it when you put it in. Planted in mass, it can be really beautiful, especially when they all bloom together. Send up those old bloom spikes. It's really stunning.
Well, I want to talk about some counterpoint plants. You brought another plant with you that it's become commonly used now in Austin. I would say it's a beloved plant in Austin. That's the silver ponyfoot. And talk about a cool, setting for a lot of plants. This one really provides it.
I've had a lot of luck with the range that plant can provide as far as it can tolerate some dampness, but then I've been able to plant it in gardens alongside yuccas and agaves, and it can still live and thrive with the same amount of water that's provided to those plants. So very versatile, looks great in containers, spilling over the edges of things, gives you this beautiful curtain effect. It catches the light. It even looks good at night when the moon's out.
Oh yeah,
because it just lights
this
up.
is a plant that will reflect moonlight for sure. And silver ponyfoot. It's a relative of dichondra, which is the common dollar weed, which I actually like as well.
It's a great ground cover.
It's a great ground cover. Right. But one more thing that you brought with you, and this is just so cool, I have to share it. This is an echeveria, right?
Yes.
And this one's called topsy-turvy.
Yeah, that has this funny little leaf shape that kind of curves in and out there, and so they call it a topsy-turvy. But, very cold hardy.
Yeah, this is the thing I can't believe about this. It's like cold hardy echeveria.
Yes.
Okay.
This is pretty much the only one that I've found that can survive the winter here. The rest of them all just melt. But this one, I don't know how it does it, but as long as you don't water it, before it freezes, as long as it stays dry during the wintertime, then it does great.
Right. Well, I'm sure people will love adding this to their rock gardens or settings with the other things we've talked about. And of course, there are other green plants like mountain laurel, but we've run out of time. We can't talk about some of those. But I know people will enjoy coming out and visiting with you at the nursery now. And I want to real quickly tell people the address one more time.
The address is 1311 East Cesar Chavez, at the corner of East Cesar Chavez and Navasota.
Okay, about 2 blocks from the former location.
Yes, just a little bit further down from I-35, but not much.
Okay, well, I know people will be beating a path to Big Red Sun. We thank you for being our guest on the program today.
Thanks for having me.
Best wishes to you, and thanks for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Coming up next, it's our friend Daphne.
Hi, and welcome to Down to Earth. I'm Daphne Richards. This week's question comes from Mark. Should he use a Winterizer fertilizer on his lawn, and when should he apply it? Whether to fertilize or not and when can be very confusing, especially as it relates to lawns. There are so many products to choose from. Winterizing fertilizers normally have a higher amount of phosphorus and potassium. More phosphorus and potassium are not necessary for us here in Central Texas or in the South. One of the most confusing aspects of a fertilizer is understanding that ratio. A higher number is a higher amount, but not necessarily a better amount. Mark told us that his fertilizer had a ratio of 32:0:10. Lawns do need more nitrogen, that first number, than any other nutrient, but is 32% too high? Sounds kind of high. But no, not if it's used properly. So this fertilizer you would use in a lower amount than maybe you're accustomed to. So read the label and follow it. That's very important always when you're using a product. And when is the best time to fertilize and how often? Very late summer or early fall, once it's no longer blazing hot and the nights have cooled down. Fall fertilizing gives lawns nutrients to help them build stronger roots and underground growth before it goes dormant in the winter, so that it has a jump start next spring. Early spring you can also fertilize, but only after the lawn's almost completely green, so in mid to late April and not earlier. Should you fertilize any other time? Well, more fertilizer means more green, but it also means more growth and more mowing and more watering. So try to find a delicate balance. If you want to fertilize once, just in the fall, or once in the fall and the spring. And after this year's drought, some lawns may be dead or at the very least dormant. So should they be fertilized at all? Well, it's kind of a delicate balance again with those weed seeds. If you fertilize now, you'll bring back the weed seeds, but you also will help your lawn a little bit. So I would say maybe skip this year and then fertilize this spring for sure. Our plant this week is gopher plant, Euphorbia rigida. This is a nice little dryland evergreen plant, and it looks great in a rock garden or an area with decomposed granite. The pale bluish-green leaves are offset nicely by the light colors of most decomposed granite that's used in our landscapes. It looks nice planted along borders as a specimen plant or even in short containers. It's about 2 feet tall, spreading to about 3 feet wide, so give it plenty of space. The leaves are narrow and pointed and makes a nice clump of pale yellow flowers at the end of each plant stalk in mid to late spring. It is poisonous. Gopher plant is evergreen and listed to hardy to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. It does rot easily, so be careful in clay soil. Maybe don't plant it there. And with wood mulch, also may rot. Plant in well-drained soil and don't overwater it. Maybe only once a month or so, which makes it great in our drought. And also plant it in full sun. To do in your garden this week, it's time to divide and replant any summer blooming perennials, if you haven't yet, before those above ground portions completely die back and you no longer remember where they are in your garden. That happens to me almost every year because I put this task off. We'd love to hear from you. Please visit klru.org/ctg to send us your questions or plants of the week from your garden.
Thanks, Daphne. Now let's check in with Trisha Shirey for Backyard Basics.
Trees are our most important landscape elements, and they can add a lot to the value of our homes. Many of the problems that trees have are a result of human error, not nature. Here are some of the things that people do to kill their trees when they're planting them. Planting trees too close together or too near a house is always a problem. You want to plant most large trees no closer than 10 to 12 feet from the house. If you're planting an oak tree that's 40 feet in diameter at mature size, it should be 20 feet from your house or another tree. Trees can damage gutters and roofs and provide a means for insects and animals to enter your home if they're too close to your house. And crowded trees get stressed due to competition for moisture and nutrients. Trees that are too close together often develop leaning habits or lopsided growth, and they tend to be weak and unattractive. One tree with a beautiful form will be easier to maintain and look better than 3 or 4 packed into that same spot. Some very large trees like bur oaks, deodar cedar, or pecans are not really designed for small residential lots unless you want to have total shade. Plant trees that are recommended for your soil type and climate zone also. Avoid planting trees near or under power lines. They'll end up being pruned and the results are usually not pretty. Put a small tree or shrubs under them, but avoid the larger trees. Leaving the burlap and wire on bald and burlapped or B&B trees is also a big mistake. Many large trees are sold with burlap holding the root ball together. That's for safe transport of the tree to keep the root ball intact, but it's not intended to be left on the tree when the tree is planted. It interferes with the growth of the roots and they'll just wrap around and around and around because the wire and the burlap don't decay under the soil level. The trees often give up and die after a while. Planting trees too deep is probably the biggest mistake that people make. Many trees are already too deep in their containers if they're container-grown trees, so check for visible root flares in the containers before you buy. The root flare is the base of the tree trunk that flares out where the trunk meets the soil line. Trees shouldn't look like a straight stick in the ground or like a telephone pole looks in the ground, either in the container or in your yard. Soil will often settle a bit after a tree is planted, so don't dig the hole any deeper than the root ball of the tree and plant the root ball an inch or 2 higher than the soil grade to compensate for settling. Staking and leaving the stakes on trees is another way that people kill their trees. Most trees don't really require staking at all. Trees develop stronger trunks when the trunks are allowed to move with the wind. You might need to stake a tall tree or trees that are on slopes or those that have a leading growth habit, but remove those stakes within 6 months for the tree to get to optimum health. Also make sure to cushion the wires that you're using to stake the trees to avoid damaging the trunk. With these tips, you'll be able to keep your trees nice and healthy and not kill them. For Backyard Basics, I'm Trisha Shirey. Thanks for joining us.
Visit klru.org/ctg to watch online, get planting guides, and more. Next week, check out tips for pecan trees. Until then, I'll see you in the garden.